Good morning. Can you all hear me okay? All right. It's good to see everyone. I'm Samantha Schock, and I'm the Acting Executive Director at the Poole Institute for Health. The Poole Institute for Health aims to sustainably improve the health of the Lehigh Valley. We know health happens in communities, and the factors that impact health over time are often things outside the healthcare system. So part of our work is to translate national and local best practices that will drive collective solutions that foster health. And out of that came this Poole Speaker Series, which brings us here together today. The Poole Speaker Series is a chance for us to bring national experts and colleagues to town to be able to share their message broadly with our colleagues across the Valley. And one of those factors that we know that impacts health is sense of connection to community and a sense of connection to one another. About a year ago, last May, we had a speaker series with Dr. Ken Thompson, where we introduced a concept called integrated community therapy, which is about thinking about how we connect with one another, how we share our experiences and support in community. And today we're going to continue that conversation, thinking about how are we aware of what's happening with others around us and how do we connect with others. We are too often hearing about events of mass violence today, and it's concerning. As a mom of two young girls, I feel the urgency around how we are collectively caring for one another, looking out for one another, and making sure that everyone has access to the supports they need. I hope you all enjoy the talk this morning from our speaker. And to introduce him, I'd like to bring up my colleague, Cheryl Arndt.
Good morning, everybody. I am Cheryl Arndt, also with the Poole Institute for Health, and I'm here to introduce Dr. Langman. Is everybody excited about this event? I know. I feel that I've talking to people before, there's a lot of excitement, and we know, as Dr. Langman has warned us, that it's going to be upsetting at times today. It's not always going to be easy what we're going to hear, but we have to remember that the goal of us being here today is that we can learn some skills to help prevent something like this from happening in our communities. And speaking of our communities, I just want to welcome, we also have people attending from our northern tier hospitals, and they are attending virtually, so welcome to everybody who's attending virtually as well. Okay, so Dr. Peter Langman is a psychologist whose research on school shooters has received international recognition. His book, Why Kids Kill: Inside the Minds of School Shooters, was translated into German, Dutch, Finnish, and Russian. His work has been cited in congressional testimony on Capitol Hill, and he has been interviewed over 500 times by media outlets in 35 countries. After the Sandy Hook attack, the CEO of the American Psychological Association presented Dr. Langman's recommendations on school safety to President Obama. He has presented at both the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and the FBI National Academy at Quantico. He has been an invited speaker at the National Counterterrorism Center and was hired by Homeland Security to train professionals in school safety. His book, School Shooters: Understanding High School, College, and Adult Perpetrators, was published in 2015. From 2018 to 2023, Dr. Langman was a researcher with the National Threat Assessment Center of the United States Secret Service. His new book is Warning Signs: Identifying School Shooters Before They Strike. And those of you in the room are happy to be able to provide everybody with a copy of that. And if you want any of the other books that Dr. Langman's written, you can purchase them from him after the event. Dr. Langman currently serves as the Director of Research and School Safety Training with DriftNet, a Chicago-based school safety and security organization. Beyond all that, Dr. Langman is an Allentown resident with a long history of working with local mental health organizations. His PhD is from Lehigh, and those of you in mental health may have crossed paths with him locally over the years. He's worked at Concern, Kids Peace, Jewish Family Services, Valley Youth House, and anyone else who might remember the Florence Child Guidance Center. He's served on the board of NAMI Lehigh Valley, and he served 10 years with the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, the Greater Lehigh Valley chapter. He still maintains a small private practice here. He's also very nice person and a very creative individual. So let's give a warm hometown welcome to Allentown's own Dr. Peter Langman.
Thank you to Cheryl and the Pool Institute for making this event possible, and especially for their generosity in providing copies of my book to everyone in attendance here. I just want to give a brief introduction as to how I got into this work. I was never someone interested in violence. You know, some people read true crime books. They just are fascinated by serial killers and mass murders, and that's just a hobby of theirs to read such books. That was not me. But as was mentioned, I was at Lehigh University for my PhD in counseling psychology. And in the academic year 1998-99, my internship was at Kids Peace Hospital. As some of you will remember, April 20th, 1999 was the attack at Columbine High School. And even though that's way out in Colorado, that had an incredible impact on our nation. Just 10 days after Columbine, on April 30th, 1999, there was a 16-year-old boy admitted to Kids Peace Hospital because he was seen as a Columbine-type risk. Of course, in the weeks after Columbine, everyone was on kind of high alert for any indication someone could be dangerous. This kid had a hit list. He had posted a homicidal comment on his website, was engaging in very strange, bizarre behavior. People saw all these signs and they sent him to us. I don't know if anyone here remembers Dr. Leafy Pollock at Kids Peace Hospital. She was my supervisor and mentor at the time. She assigned that 16-year-old boy to me. And I didn't know it at the time, but that was a turning point in my career. Because I had to evaluate this young man, not just clinically in terms of diagnosis, but in terms of a risk assessment. Was he really a potential mass murderer? And not long after that case, there was another potential school shooter, and another one, and another one. And after my internship, I was hired at Kids Peace. I was there over 12 years. All too often, I was sitting face to face with a person contemplating mass murder. I decided, excuse me, I better know everything I can to keep our community safe. Sorry, 3 weeks ago, I was sick, and I've just got this lingering thing going on in my throat here. Anyway, in 2006, there was yet another school shooting, and I thought these things just keep happening. And I thought, based on my work with potential killers, as well as my studying of mass attackers across the nation, that I thought I had something to contribute. So that's when I wrote my first book. You see my website up there? That's started 15 years ago with maybe 4 documents. There's now over 600 documents, about 70,000 pages of material. If you're looking for information on a particular perpetrator, if you want to find guidelines on threat assessment or warning signs, reports by the FBI or Secret Service, that is a resource I put out to get the information to the people who need it. So please take advantage of the website. This is a terrifying topic. There's no way to get around facing the fact that if you work in schools or if you have kids, this is our worst nightmare. So I often feel like I traumatize and depress my audiences. That's not my intention. So I'm going to talk a little bit about reasons to hope and put this in perspective, and then we can go on and get traumatized. Okay. Just a warning. These attacks can be stopped. In fact, they often are stopped, and we don't hear about them if they don't happen. They often don't make the news media. But very frequently, people see the warning signs. Someone reports them, they get investigated, no attack happens. And the best way to do that is through a process called threat assessment. Threat assessment means warning signs are brought to your attention, you investigate them, you evaluate them, and decide if it's a real threat or not. If it is a real threat, then you look to see what services you can put in place to keep that student safe. The motto of my book that you have here is, we're all on duty. And that's not just the people in the room. Everyone, everywhere, should have that mindset that we're all on duty. So every chapter in my book ends with an example of a thwarted attack. Because I want people to recognize, yes, these things can be stopped. They are stopped often. And we can play a role in stopping mass violence. So there was a 18-year-old girl, young woman, working in a pharmacy. And a man dropped off a roll of film to have his photographs developed. And he was coming back the next day around 6 o'clock to pick up the photos. Well, about 5:45, she's looking at the developed photos. And there's guns and close-ups of his face with this hateful, angry look, and like piles of ammunition and explosives. And she thinks, I don't like the look of this, but what do I do about it? So she asked a colleague. Colleague said, I don't know what we should do. Asked her manager. He wasn't sure. She called her father. Her father was a police officer. He said, call 911 now. The guy showed up to get his photos about 6:15. Police were there waiting for him. They arrested him, got a search warrant. They searched his home. He had the guns and the bombs. He had maps of his college campus. He had a diary writing about how he was going to commit this massive attack, worse than Columbine, and kill everybody. And this was going to happen the following morning. But because a young woman saw something that concerned her, called the police, that massacre never happened. So it's not just professionals who are on duty. Anyone who sees or hears something of concern can contribute to keeping our community safe. So I want to put concerns about school safety in some perspective. So my motto here is prepare, but don't panic. You know, I've had teenage clients talk about their fear of even being in school, teachers afraid of being in school, parents afraid to send their kids to school. And this is a result of a few high-profile incidents. And we just get media saturation. From Columbine, Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook, Parkland, Uvalde. You know, over the years, there have been a few really horrific massacres in our schools. And that just elevates everybody's anxiety. But you have to be careful, because when you see data in the news, you have to look at the fine print to see what that means, how they're counting these incidents. And of course, if you want people to read your story, you put some alarming data in the headline, and that'll grab everyone's attention. But what does that data really mean? So for example, in 2018, the Gun Violence Archive said there were 331 mass shootings in America in 1 year. According to the FBI definition, there were 7. A huge discrepancy. How many post-Columbine mass shootings have there been? 220, or 6. So when you see alarming data, if you don't look at the fine print and what that means and how they're counting things, it's easy to just have our anxiety go through the roof. So here's my question to you. As you go through your day, where are you in the greatest danger of being killed? In your car, okay? So if I'm presenting to school folks, I tell them when you drive up to school and get out of your vehicle and walk into the school building, you've just gone from the most dangerous place you will be all day to the safest place you will be all day. Obviously, violence can occur in schools, but when you look at rates of violence across our society as a whole, schools are probably the safest place you can be in terms of where homicide occurs. You know, there's 1,300 times more traffic deaths than deaths in school shootings. Not 13 times, 1,300 times. And you know, more people die in school parking lot traffic accidents than in school shootings. But we don't hear about that because that's maybe one person here and one person there, so it never makes the news. So school homicides, 0.1% of the homicides in this country. So yes, we have a violence problem in our nation, but it's happening almost everywhere but schools. And you're a lot more likely to be hit by lightning than you are to be killed in a school shooting. So I want to try to shift our perspective so that we're more reality-based, not just fear-based in our thinking. So what if there were something like a Parkland or Uvalde event every month, even through summer, 12 times a year? And thankfully, there's nothing like that happening. But what if there were? Well, we've got more than 120,000 K-12 schools in our country, actually about 132,000. But to keep the math simple, I rounded down. And so even if we had a Parkland massacre every month, you divide 120,000 schools by 12 attacks a year, any particular school would have an attack once every 10,000 years. These are extraordinarily rare events. So I say prepare, but don't panic. We have to prepare because they do happen. And if we're not prepared, they're more likely to happen. But in terms of how we go about our day, encouraging our kids to go to school and feel safe, if you work in schools to feel safe, it's important to have some perspective because the news can make us think this is happening all the time, everywhere. Okay, so our schools are safe, and we can make them even safer. I'm going to be quoting the writings of some school shooters. There's profanity. Now, you've all heard profanity. More than that, there's some fantasies of violence, what they're thinking they would like to do to people. I put the writings up as they were written. Nothing is sugar-coated here. It may be the kind of thing you're not used to hearing in a professional presentation. Maybe if you work in a high school, you hear that kind of thing all the time. You might not expect to hear it in a place like this, but you're going to hear it. So I'm just giving you a heads up. So a lot of people talk about the profile. They're looking for a profile. If you can only give me a profile, a checklist, you know, who is a school shooter? Well, and why do they do it? Well, there's no blanket answers. So I put it this way. Different types of people commit different types of attacks for different reasons. And there's no profile of a school shooter. There's no one cause of school shootings. These are complex individuals, complex phenomena. You have to have a sense of nuance to appreciate the complexity here. So we need to recognize how varied school shooters can be, have some idea of what might be driving their attacks, and what constitutes warning signs of potential or impending violence. So we're going to go through some things here. And a lot of people want to put the blame for school shootings on something like bullying. Kind of makes sense. Why else would a kid shoot up his school. But bullying happens in every school probably every day. And 99.99999% of the kids who get picked on or teased never kill anybody. So how can we say bullying causes school shootings? Or maybe they play violent video games. Well, like 97% of teenage boys play violent video games. They don't kill people, you know? So cannot explain something extraordinarily rare, like a mass attack, by pointing to something extraordinarily common, like video games or being teased at school. Doesn't mean that being picked on never has any contribution to make towards someone on the path, but by itself, it really doesn't explain anything. So I'm going to give you a quote from Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. He was an Army Ranger, and he does a lot of work now on training law enforcement and preventing violence. He wrote a book called On Killing. It's a fascinating book. Because in the book, he documents how for centuries in wars throughout the world, soldiers often don't pull the trigger, or they deliberately shoot over the head of their enemy because they just can't bring themselves to kill another human being. You're not supposed to do that. So even in warfare, you have trained soldiers in a combat situation facing soldiers who could kill them, and especially when it's up close, people don't pull the trigger. And this fascinates me. Grossman writes, as men draw this near to their enemies, it becomes extremely difficult to deny their humanity. Looking in a man's face, seeing his eyes and his fear eliminate denial. At this range, the interpersonal nature of the killing has shifted. Instead of shooting at a uniform and killing a generalized enemy, now the killer must shoot at a person and kill a specific individual. Most simply cannot or will not do it. And as a psychologist, this fascinates me. Because if soldiers in combat, facing someone who can kill them, have a hard time pulling the trigger, how do we understand kids, sometimes shockingly young kids, going into their own schools, civilians, non-combat, and just gunning down innocent, unarmed people? That's the question I've spent years trying to answer. So you're going to hear a bit of the answer today. We don't have time to go really in depth, but I'm going to try to shed some light on this. So the primary lens I use to understand things as a psychologist is trying to understand their psychological dynamics. So over the years, I've developed a model of 3 different types of people who commit school shootings. And in recent years, I've expanded to other types of mass attackers too, and I think this typology is relevant for many types of killers. And so we're going to start with a psychopathic school shooter. You may have some idea what a psychopath is. Here's a few things that I highlight. Extreme narcissism. If there's one thing that kind of explains everything else about psychopaths, it's their narcissism. They live for themselves. Other people really just don't matter. So their narcissism ties into their lack of morality. They don't care about rules, laws, and morality. Why? Because rules, laws, and morality put limits on human behavior. They say there are certain things you're not allowed to do. Psychopaths are above rules, laws, and morality. They have no use for them. They think they don't apply to them. After all, I'm special. I should be able to do whatever I want. And the narcissism also means they don't care about anybody. There's no empathy. If they do something that hurts somebody, there's no guilt. There's no remorse. They just don't care. They're callous. These are callous, cold-blooded people. Not only do they not care if they hurt somebody, some of them are actively sadistic. They want to hurt people because that's fun. That is a good time. It's a thrill. It's a pleasure. They get a kick out of having the power to hurt and eventually kill people. Makes them very dangerous people. Unfortunately, from a threat assessment perspective, to identify potential killers, They're very good at what's called impression management. They know how to make a good impression when they want to. They're con artists. That makes them even more dangerous. Anyone can lie. Not everyone can lie as charmingly as a psychopath. They can charm us. They can be very charismatic. It can seem like the whole thing was just a big misunderstanding, and this is the nicest person I ever met, and he would never do anything, even as he's planning to kill everybody. And nothing's ever their fault, because again, they should be able to do whatever they want. So when there's consequences for misconduct, they feel like they're the victim, because rules shouldn't apply to them. And because they're so entitled, and because there are limits in the world, society does say certain things are not permitted, they're easily enraged. So they may go through life chronically frustrated and chronically enraged because people expect them to follow rules, laws, and morality. And I think the gap between what the research shows and the public understanding of school shooters partly is due to the fact that it's hard to comprehend how dark someone's heart can be, especially when you're talking about middle school and high school kids. Maybe we can understand a hardened criminal, so to speak, an adult career criminal. Yeah, someone like that we could accept being callous. But kids in school, I think that's hard to really grasp. So to help us grasp that, I'm going to talk briefly about Brenda Spencer and then go on to my primary case example of a psychopath. So Brenda was a 16-year-old girl in San Diego. She had two goals in life: become a sniper and kill police officers. And she talked a lot with one of her buddies, a young boy, about how they would kill people. So one day, Brenda decided to fulfill her dream. She lived across the street from a former elementary school. So in the morning, as kids are arriving at school, 5- and 6-year-old kids, she starts gunning down from the comfort of her own home. And as the adults come, school folks and police, she shoots at them too. A reporter hears that there's an active shooter incident playing out in town. So he looks up the phone number of a house in that neighborhood, seeing if he can get an eyewitness account of what's happening. He calls that number. Brenda Spencer answered the phone. He had unknowingly called the house of the person committing the attack. So we know what Brenda Spencer was saying because she was saying it to a reporter. I'm going to stay here a while. I want to have some more fun. It was fun seeing kids being shot in a group. It looked like a herd of cows standing around the one that was shot. It was real easy pickings. It was fun to watch the kids that had red or blue ski jackets. They made the best targets. It was like shooting ducks in a pond. It was so easy. I enjoyed watching them squirm around after they had been shot. A 16-year-old girl getting pleasure out of seeing 5- and 6-year-old kids writhing in agony from gunshot wounds. How can we really take that in? That's a psychopath. There's no empathy, no compassion, cold-blooded, callous, and sadistic. This was probably the best thing she had ever done in her life in terms of how excited and how much of a thrill this was. So when we're talking about school shooters, one thing we have to keep in mind is they could have a psychopathic personality. So my primary case example is Eric Harris, one of the Columbine killers. We have a lot of Eric's writings. They're all on my website if you want to look at them. When Eric signed his friends' yearbooks, he sometimes wrote Ich bin Gott, which is German for I am God. Now, that might sound like a delusion of grandeur, but he knew it wasn't God. He just liked to fantasize about it. After all, everyone was lower than him, but we didn't know that we were lower. If he were God, it would be official. and we'd all have to bow down to Eric because he was the superior being. I feel like God, and I wish I was, having everyone being officially lower than me. My belief is that if I say something, it goes. I am the law. If you don't like it, you die. He was 16 when he wrote that. Again, how do we really comprehend a 16-year-old who essentially thinks he's king of the world or ought to be king of the world? And he doesn't have any respect for our laws because he's the lawmaker. That's extreme narcissism. And his writings are full of comments like these. Morals is just another word. What's a word? It's language. It's a human construct. It has no inherent meaning. I don't give a good goddamn about what you think is right and what is wrong. There's no such thing as true good and true evil. And if there's no good and no evil, there's no limits. Like I said, rules, laws, and morality all go out the window. Nothing is good, nothing is bad. He can now do whatever he wants because there's no limits. And what did he want to do? Well, you see a profound lack of compassion, lack of empathy. Natural selection. Kill all retards. People spend millions of dollars on saving the lives of retards, and why? I don't buy that shit like, oh, he's my son, though. So the fuck what? He ain't normal. Kill him. Put him out of his misery. He's only a waste of time and money. Cold-blooded. No compassion, no empathy. But he wasn't only callous, he was also sadistic. And in his journal, he wrote about his fantasies of tricking girls he knew to come to his bedroom where he would rape them. Now, he never did that, but that was his fantasy. That's what he wanted to do. There's nothing about love in Eric's journal. There's lust, there's rape, there's no love. Because to love someone, you need compassion and empathy. This next passage is his fantasy of sadistic violence. Again, just giving you a heads up of what's coming. You cannot understand what happened at Columbine if we don't really take in this is who Eric Harris was. I want to tear a throat out with my own teeth like a pop can. I want to gut someone with my hand, to tear a head off and rip out the heart and lungs from the neck, to stab someone in the gut, shove it up to their heart, and yank the fucking blade out of their rib cage. I want to grab some weak little freshman and just tear them apart like a wolf, show them who is God. Strangle them, squish their head, bite their temples in the skull, rip off their jaw, rip off their collarbones, break their arms in half and twist them around. The lovely sounds of bones cracking and flesh ripping. Ah, so much to do and so little chances. It's like Brenda Spencer just having fun watching children writhing in agony. This would be a good time for him to just rip flesh and break bones. So yes, even in high school, kids can have a psychopathic personality. Now, unfortunately, like a lot of psychopaths, Eric was a con artist. If I have to cheat and lie to everyone, that's fine. I have confidence in my ability to deceive people. And speaking of school administrators, I could convince them that I'm going to climb Mount Everest or have a twin brother growing out of my back. I can make you believe anything. So 15 months before the attack, Harris and Klebold were arrested. They're driving around the foothills of the Rockies outside Denver, and they came across an electrician's van parked in the middle of nowhere, no driver in sight. So what do? Well, you get a rock, smash a window, break in, and steal stuff. So they grab whatever equipment they can and throw it into their car, and they drive off down the road a little ways. And then they stop to take a look at their loot. They had no idea what they were grabbing. They were just throwing stuff into their car. Police cruiser comes by. Got two kids just on the side of the road at night. It looks a little fishy. So the officer stops, gets out, and talks to the two boys, and they admit to what they've done. So they get arrested, and they have probation. Part of the probation was to write an apology letter to the van owner, okay? I strongly feel I owe you an apology, an explanation. I am truly sorry for what I have done. And Eric also wrote an essay for a teacher at school about his whole experience of being arrested. And the gist of the essay was, I can't believe I did something so stupid. But you know, I've really learned my lesson. And I'm going to be a better person from now on as a result of this experience. Teacher was very impressed. You know, Eric, it's not one action that makes a person. I would trust you in a heartbeat. But what was Eric writing in the privacy of his own journal? Isn't America supposed to be the land of the free? How come, if I'm free, I can't deprive a stupid fucking dumb shit from his possessions if he leaves them sitting in the front seat of his fucking van, out in plain sight in the middle of fucking nowhere on a Friday fucking day night? Natural selection, fucker should be shot. So we learn a few things from this. We see how good a con man Eric was. He wrote a very convincing apology letter. He wrote a very convincing essay for his teacher who says, I would trust you in a heartbeat. But this is what Eric was thinking. Who's the victim in Eric's mind in this situation? He is. How can you blame me? That guy is so stupid. If you leave your stuff out, what do you think's going to happen? He deserves to be shot. All I did was the natural thing. I took what I could grab. I'm not at fault here. You see how the mind of a psychopath works. And the idea of America being the land of the free. Well, yeah, we have a lot of freedom, but we still have laws. But it's taking the concept of freedom to mean, again, no rules, laws, and morality, no limits on his behavior. So if America's the land of the free, he's free to do whatever he can get away with. That's how a psychopath thinks. Parent of a friend of his described Eric this way: the perfect little gentleman. What a great kid to come and visit, hang out with your son. If you were a teacher and had him in class, he might be your favorite student. He was bright, always came prepared, joined in class discussions, raised his hand, active participant. Look at his report card comments. Positive attitude and good cooperation. Strong interest in participation. Eric is doing awesome. Such a great student. And how about the probation officer? Well, he's used to dealing with juvenile delinquents. But he was so conned by Eric, he cut short Eric's probation because he was such a great kid who was doing so well. And he wrote this: really nice young man. Seems responsible and remorseful. Prognosis: good. Eric is a very bright young man who is likely to succeed in life. And when was that written? February 99. When was the attack? April 99. He had been planning it since the previous spring, well on his way to finalizing his plans, even as he's conning people into thinking he's such a great kid with such a great future. That's a psychopath. So from a threat assessment perspective, we have to recognize just how good someone can be at fooling everybody. I'm going to pause here, see if there's questions or comments either about the psychopathic shooter in general or about Eric in particular.
Do you know anything about his trauma?
Okay, the question is, do I know anything about his upbringing? Was there a trauma, for example? No, with all the scrutiny this family was under, nothing has come to light that would suggest significant dysfunction. He has an older brother who was academically, socially successful, and apparently has gone on to live a normal life. Nothing in the family suggests that there was any contributing factor there. In fact, in Eric's school planner, on Sunday, Mother's Day, he wrote a fascinating comment. He quoted Shakespeare from The Tempest. So on Mother's Day, in that little box, he wrote, "Good wombs have borne bad sons." And if you're familiar with the concept of the bad seed, there's a novel back mid-20th century called The Bad Seed. It was made into a play and a movie and so on. It's the idea that someone's just kind of born bad. And it seems to be Eric's recognition. That's who he was. And he even wrote, "Don't blame my parents. They're great. Good wombs have borne bad sons." Okay, question is about Eric's relationships with his parents as well as peers. Parents were involved in his life. Eric generally praised his parents in his writings. At one point, he expressed some frustration because his father was in the Air Force, so it's a military family. So Eric lived maybe 3, 4 different places during his life. And, that can be hard on a kid, but that's true of a military family. So he did complain about that at least once in his writings, but overall he's saying my parents are great and this has nothing to do with them and so on. And Eric did have friends. This was not the isolated, misfit, outcast type of kid. His birthday was April 9th, 11 days before the attack. A bunch of his buddies, male and female, took him out to dinner. He had friends. He had played soccer for 2 years at Columbine High School. He had played soccer in a local community league. He went paintball shooting and bowling with his buddies. Again, this was not an isolated kid. Now, he did alienate some kids, especially in junior and senior year, because as kids said, something seemed to change. He seemed to become darker and obsessed with guns and violence. So some kids kind of drifted away, but he still had a good number of friends. Okay, the question is there evidence that Eric enjoyed those relationships, or was that just part of his presentation? I think he had fun with his friends. I think he had fun going, paintball shooting and going bowling, and he made films like home movies with some of his buddies, including Dylan Klebold, and I think he enjoyed those activities. Doesn't mean he cared about his friends in a deep, compassionate way, because I don't think he had that ability. I think he enjoyed the activities with his friends, though.
Friend who also robbed the band. What was the experience with teacher and probation officer in that friend compared to Eric's?
Okay, the question is about Dylan Klebold, who got arrested with Eric, who was also the other perpetrator in the attack. Dylan struggled socially, internally. He was very anxious, felt awkward, and people described him as kind of a goofy kid. And Dylan never felt confident socially, but he also had friends, male and female, and was engaged in multiple activities. His classroom behavior was not as positive as Eric's. There was at least one teacher who was afraid of him. And he would disrupt class sometimes, maybe use profanity, once walked out and slammed the door. He had a temper that was showing in class. Eric had a temper too, but only some of his peers saw it. His teachers did not. So Dylan did not have such a positive impression in terms of how the teachers viewed him. And that's something to keep in mind. If you or anyone you work with is living in fear of somebody, that is valuable information. Because if you're a high school teacher, in the course of your career, you've had hundreds, thousands of kids you've worked with. And if suddenly there's one, and you're afraid of that kid, that's valuable information. There's a book from the 90s by Gavin de Becker called The Gift of Fear. And fear is a gift because sometimes we pick up on cues and we couldn't even articulate what we're picking up on. But something at some level is telling us you should not be comfortable with this person. And if you tune into that and respect that, that could save your life. If you haven't read The Gift of Fear, it's a fascinating and important book. The question is, Maybe it was Columbine or maybe not, but did Eric or Dylan tell certain peers, don't go to school today? That was not Eric or Dylan. That has happened in other school shootings. And that's a classic warning sign. And kid says, by the way, don't go to school tomorrow. And maybe they'll tell you why, like I'm going to bring a gun, it's going to be bloody. Or maybe they don't tell you why, but like a kid who says, yeah, don't be in school on Friday, or don't be in the cafeteria today. Kids have to know to report that. Going back to Eric's callousness and his friendships. Besides his journal, Harris and Klebold left audio and video recordings of themselves talking about the upcoming attack. In one of those recordings, Eric names two of his closest friends and says, if you guys live, I want you to have my CD collection or whatever. He's saying to his best friends, if you live. He was well aware he was probably going to kill his own best friends. But if he didn't, hey, you can have my CDs. Like, he did not warn his best friends. He was just going to go ahead and commit the attack. And if by any chance of luck they survived, he was going to be generous and let them have some of his stuff. But no warning to his friends. So in the interest, oh, one more question. Mike?
Why journal? Why videotape this stuff before doing it?
Well, as Eric said on his website, I want to leave a lasting impression on the world. He wanted to go down in history. He even considered mailing his writings to local television stations for posterity. He and Dylan pondered which director would make a movie about them. Would it be Quentin Tarantino or Steven Spielberg? They were thinking fame and going down in history and leaving the documents for posterity. I think that was a big piece of it. And maybe he just wanted a place to vent, because he does a lot of venting in his journal. Okay, in interest of time, I mean, we could talk about Columbine all day. It is such a massive incident with such massive repercussions even today. People cite Columbine and they want to imitate Eric Harris. The impact of Columbine continues to reverberate, not just in our country, but around the world. People in other countries commit attacks citing Columbine as an influence. And what I've given you on Eric Harris maybe is more than just scratching the surface, but there's a whole lot more to talk about. I've written about him in my books, articles on my website. Again, original source materials from the incident are on the site. So if you want to go deeper, there's plenty of material there. So the psychopathic was the first type of school shooters. Second type is psychotic. Again, you may have some idea of what psychosis is. Hallucinations, most commonly auditory. Delusions, most commonly paranoid or delusions of grandeur, but they could be any kind of bizarre beliefs. You may see disorganized speech, writing, and behavior. Things just stop making sense. But besides the psychotic symptoms themselves, these people tend to be very impaired in terms of their relationships, their emotions. They're often suffering a lot of anguish, depression. They may know there's something wrong with them, but not understand what's wrong with them. They just feel so utterly different than everybody else. Not your typical teenager who feels different than peers, but just utterly different, maybe not even human. Some have written about not being human. And they look around and it seems like everybody else is happy and thriving, or at least everyone else is so-called normal, and they know they're not. So there can be incredible envy. So they may not attack anyone who ever did anything to them. They may target the kids who are succeeding where they're failing, the kids who represent the success they wish they could have, but don't. So I think envy can be a powerful motivating factor. And again, I think there's a disconnect between the research and the public because people don't really understand how devastating psychotic symptoms can be. Sometimes after an attack, I'll see a comment like this in the media. He's not psychotic, he planned this. That doesn't make sense because psychotic people can still engage in very meaningful behavior. They can be very methodical in planning and carrying out an attack. Even if there's a voice in their head telling them to do it, even if they have a paranoid delusion, they may be out of touch with reality in one or more ways, but they're still capable of meaningful behavior. The public often does not understand that. So my example here is Kip Kinkle, 15-year-old boy up in Oregon. Now the rule of thumb with psychosis or schizophrenia is the earlier the onset, the worse the prognosis. Average age of onset of psychosis or schizophrenia in males is early adulthood, could be late teens, early 20s. Kip was having hallucinations at age 12, 3 distinct voices talking to him. And he lived in Oregon, and he was convinced the Chinese army is going to invade the United States. So he had to stockpile guns and bombs for the day the Chinese showed up on his doorstep. And he also thought, you know, those voices I'm hearing, maybe somehow the government put a computer chip in my brain and they're broadcasting those voices through that chip. So multiple psychotic symptoms at a very young age. He wrote, I don't know who I am. I hate myself for what I've become. I'm repulsive. My eyes hurt. They hurt so bad. They feel like they're trying to crawl out of my head. Why aren't I normal? Painfully aware there was something really wrong with him, but he didn't know what it was, and he never told anybody. He didn't tell his parents. He was seeing a psychologist for depression and anger. He never even told his psychologist about the voices or the paranoia because he was so aware of the stigma against mental illness and how that would affect his parents, how that would affect his life if word ever got out that he was so-called crazy. So he kept all of this to himself. I am so full of rage that I feel I could snap at any moment. I sound so pitiful. People would laugh at this if they read it. I hate being laughed at. But they won't laugh after the scraping parts of their parents, sisters, brothers, and friends from the wall of my hate. Please, someone help me. Oh God, I'm so close to killing people. So close. So here he is asking for help, but only asking for help in his journal. Not from his parents, not from his psychologist. There's so many lessons learned from all these cases, but especially this one. So many things went wrong. So many things could have been done differently. On May 20th, 1998, Kip was found to have a loaded gun in his locker at school. Police were called. They came in and arrested him and took him out in handcuffs. He was suspended pending a formal expulsion hearing and taken down to the police station. Father came to the police station, picked him up, and took him home. Now, Kip's relationship with his dad was not great. It was kind of strained. And Father had struggled to try to get Kip to function and do better. And he was at his wit's end. So he thought, you know, Kip's out of control. He needs discipline. Dad gets home, gets on the phone, and calls a military academy. His son just needed to be straightened out. Well, there were guns in the home. Dad knew there were guns in the home because against his better judgment, he had bought some guns for Kip. There were also other guns Dad didn't know about because Kip had bought them illegally from friends. Kip took one of these guns, came downstairs, and his father's on the phone. He shot his father in the back of the head and killed him instantly. He covered his father's body with a sheet. So Kip's mother was out running errands. She was gone for a few hours. She finally comes home having done the grocery shopping. Kip helps her unload the groceries from the garage into the kitchen. When he finishes, he turns to his mother and says, "I love you, Mom." Takes out the gun and shoots her. That shot didn't kill her, so she's writhing in agony, so he fires 5 more times. She's dead. He covers her with a sheet. Through the afternoon and evening, Kip got calls from some of his friends. I don't know if they saw him taken out in handcuffs or not, but they're calling and saying, "Kip, how are you doing? What's up?" He does not tell them what he has done. But he wrote a short note about it. This is part of it. I have just killed my parents. I'm so sorry. I am a horrible son. I wish I had been aborted. I destroy everything I touch. My head just doesn't work right. God damn these voices inside my head. I want to die. I want to be gone, but I have to kill people. I don't know why. I'm so sorry. Why did God do this to me? So if we compare this to the passage of Eric Harris's fantasy of ripping people to shreds and how much fun that would be, we see a profoundly different personality. Kip has guilt, remorse. He is experiencing profound self-loathing. And he just wants to die. He's suicidal, but the voices are telling him you have to kill people. And he says, why did God do this to me? So Kip is sorry, incredibly remorseful. And that's a profound statement. I wish I had been aborted. In other words, the world would be better off if I had never even been born, because I destroy everything I touch. It's a totally different person than Eric Harris, who had no compassion, no guilt, and just couldn't wait to murder people and enjoy it. Questions about Kip or psychotic shooters?
I feel sorry for him that he was sick. I know that sounds sick. I feel sorry that obviously he didn't get the help that he needed. But had he gotten, I know you can't forget this, had he been treated appropriately, diagnosed as, with the voices and schizophrenia, whatever, would he, do you believe, been able to live a life free of killing one?
Okay, the question is, if Kip had been properly diagnosed and treated, could he have gone on and lived a more or less normal, at least safe life? And I'm going to say yes. And I'm basing that on two things. The summer before the attack, he was prescribed Prozac for his depression. Now, Prozac is not an antipsychotic medication, and yet it had an antipsychotic effect. And it brought the voices down to, like turning down the volume on them so he could kind of just ignore them. And his mother said that was the best summer Kip ever had. So what happened? He didn't seem depressed anymore, so they figured, I guess he doesn't need the medication. So they stopped the Prozac. 8 months later, he's a killer. And I didn't even tell you what happened. He stayed in the house overnight with the bodies of his parents, went to school the next day and shot 27 people. Fortunately, 25 survived. So one reason I think he could have been maintained is the Prozac before the incident. And also, since then, he is now medicated. He survived the attack, so he's in prison probably for life. And he's been stable for years, but he'll probably never get out, because who wants to be the one to say, yeah, he's safe to leave prison? No one wants to take that chance. Okay. Interest of time and covering as much as we can, I'm going to move on. So we've done psychopathic and psychotic. The third type is the traumatized. The psychopathic and psychotic shooters typically come from more or less stable, intact families. That's not true when you get to these perpetrators. These are kids from chronically, severely violent, dysfunctional homes. And though abuse and trauma can occur at any socioeconomic level, the traumatized shooters tend to come from the low end of the economic spectrum. So on top of everything else, some of them have grown up in pretty severe poverty. Not all of them, but you do see that in this category. So in every case, at least one, sometimes both parents are alcoholic or drug addicts. At least one, if not both parents, have a criminal history, sometimes to the point of incarceration. There's all kinds of abuse in the home. Sexual abuse sometimes occurs in the home, sometimes in the community, sometimes in a foster home that these kids end up in. And because the family's so dysfunctional, They may bounce around from mom's house to dad's house to grandparents and in and out of foster care and back to mom, and she's drinking again, so now they go to a different foster home and so on. So on top of the actual trauma of abuse and domestic violence and all of that, there may be ongoing stress related to always starting over, new home, new caregiver, maybe no social continuity with friends, no educational continuity if they're moving across school districts, just very difficult lives. My case example here is Jeffrey Weiss. Jeffrey was a Native American boy. He lived in Lake, Minnesota, which is a reservation. And Jeffrey's parents were never married, so they never even lived together as far as I know. So he either lived with mom or dad, but not as a family unit. We don't know much about the father. I once found a comment that said, essentially, father was not a bad guy when he was sober. Suggests he often wasn't sober, and that when he was drinking, maybe wasn't such a nice person to be around. The one thing we do know about the father is that when Jeffrey was 8 years old, the father got into an armed standoff with the tribal police. So dad is holed up in his house. House is surrounded by the tribal officers. Complicating the situation is the fact that Jeffrey's grandfather, the father's father, was one of those police officers. The grandfather is trying to talk his own son into surrendering. The father refused to surrender, turned the gun on himself, and died by suicide. Now, somewhere along the line, Jeffrey's mom had married and had 2 kids. So Jeffrey had a mother, stepfather, and half-brother and half-sister. Mom was a severe alcoholic. She was out drinking with a cousin one day. Got back into the car. Cousin was driving. Got in a car accident. Cousin was killed. Jeffrey's mother sustained serious brain damage, which led to their separation and divorce from the husband. The husband basically says, all right, I'm out of here, and he took his 2 kids and moved away. But he did not take Jeffrey. Jeffrey was not his kid. Jeffrey was not his problem. So within a span of 2 years, Jeffrey lost his father to suicide, his mother to brain damage, his stepfather, half-brother, and half-sister to distance because they just moved off and left him behind. Jeffrey lived with maybe aunts and uncles, grandparents, foster homes. He had no stable home at this point. He said, my mom used to abuse me a lot when I was little. She would hit me with anything she could get her hands on. She used to drink excessively, too. She would tell me I was a mistake, and she would say so many things that it's hard to deal with them or think of them without crying. So mom was not only alcoholic, she was physically abusive. The stepfather was also physically abusive to Jeffrey. The mother's message to Jeffrey was, you were never wanted in the first place. You only exist because you're a mistake. Jeffrey wrote about the kind of pain that makes you physically sick at times, makes you so depressed you can't function, makes you so sad and overwhelmed with grief that eating a bullet or sticking your head in a noose seems welcoming. So perhaps it's no surprise he became suicidal. So he made an attempt. I went through a lot of things in my life that had driven me to a darker path than most choose to take. I split the flesh on my wrist with a box opener, painting the floor of my bedroom with blood I shouldn't have spilt. After sitting there for what seemed like hours, I had the revelation that this was not the path. So he sliced his wrist, got hospitalized. They held him for 72 hours and sent him on his way. I don't even know what home he went to at that point. Tried to turn his life around. He had some things going for him. He had buddies. Played guitar in an informal band with some of his friends. Smoked a lot of marijuana, that was his drug of choice. Watched movies, played video games, hung out with his buddies. That was about it. But things didn't get any better. And you see a combination of just kind of hopelessness, but also anger and bitterness. So fucking naive, man, so fucking naive. Always expecting change when I know nothing ever changes. I've seen mothers choose their man over their own flesh and blood. I've seen others choose alcohol over friendship. I sacrifice no more for others. Part of me has fucking died and I hate this shit. I'm living every man's nightmare and that single fact is kicking my ass. I really must be fucking worthless. This place never changes. It never will. Fuck it all. So he's depressed and suicidal, but he's also angry and just bitter to the point of hopelessness. And he summed up his life this way. 16 years of accumulated rage, suppressed by nothing more than brief glimpses of hope, which have all but faded to black. I can feel the urges within slipping through the cracks. The leash I can no longer hold. He was an aspiring writer, posted a lot of his fiction online. You can see he had some talent in this passage. He's very articulate. So one morning, wherever he was living, he had access to a gun. But he didn't go to the school, not first. He went to his grandfather's house. And he walked in, and he shot and killed his grandfather and grandfather's girlfriend. Gathered up grandfather's firearms, got into grandfather's police cruiser, and drove to the school. The school had an armed security guard and a metal detector. He walked up to the guard and shot him. Walked in the building, right through the metal detector, opened fire. Within minutes, the tribal police respond. So just like his father, he's in an armed standoff with the tribal police. Just like his father, he refused to surrender, turned the gun on himself, and died by suicide. So if we look at these three cases, Eric Harris, Kip Kinkle, Jeffrey Weiss, they all did what looked like the same thing. They committed a mass attack at their school. But in terms of who they were, the pathway they walked to get to that point, three profoundly different life experiences, personalities, and so on. I'm going to pause here again, see if there's any questions. So this is the point everyone's depressed and traumatized. It's very heavy material, I know. Adam. Okay, the question is about suicidality and kind of the intersection or differentiation between violence against self versus violence against others. Now, in this case, often it's both, violence against others and then self. Just to put this in some context, I published an article called Multi-Victim School Shootings in the United States, a 50-year review. And I looked at 1966 through 2015, 50 years of multi-victim school shootings. And so I have some data on suicide. It's harder to calculate than you might think, but in broad figures, about half of school shooters die by suicide in the attacks. So that's a lot, but it also means then half don't. And sometimes it's hard to see why they would kill anybody else rather than just kill themselves. I mean, that would be tragic enough, but why do you have to bring innocent people into it? And one difference might be, the either psychopathic personalities, psychosis, trauma histories. They're very angry people. They're full of rage. And they want to take that rage out. They want to unleash it on the world. Even if they want to die, maybe they don't want to die alone and obscure. They want to die going out in a so-called blaze of glory and make the world pay attention to them. I'm going to come to some stuff in a bit about violence as a self-enhancing act. I also looked at some cases where, like among the traumatized shooters, some killed themselves and some didn't. Is there something we can identify to explain that? One factor might be that if they had even one functional parent, it seemed like they were less likely to kill themselves. If both parents were violent, abusive, addicted, and so on, it seemed like maybe there was a greater chance the traumatized kids would kill themselves in the attack. So, I've tried to tease out some of that, but it's difficult. I don't know if that answers your question or not. It's good enough, huh? Yes. That was psychopathic.
But for the psychopath, for traumatized, is there any evidence to show that they had any sort of targeting involved in their plans?
Okay, the question, and this is a good question, these are all very good questions, is about victim selection. Were there targets in the attack? Some attacks are completely random. The random ones are the ones we hear most about. Columbine, Virginia Tech, Parkland, Uvalde, Sandy Hook. These were all random attacks, no specific victim. So we hear a lot about a hit list, but a lot of attacks, there is no hit list. They're just going in to kill. Targeted attacks, as opposed to random attacks, are the ones with the hit list. There's intended targeted victims. And those could either be specific individuals or groups of people. Like it could be the girl who dumped me, or it could be all girls because I hate females. So you see targets of two different types like that. And you can have either random or targeted attackers in any of the three categories: psychopathic, psychotic, or traumatized. And you also get mixed attacks. Kip Kinkle killed his parents. Those are very specific targeted victims. And then at school, it was a random attack. Same with Jeffrey Weiss, killed his grandfather and grandfather's girlfriend. Very specific targeted people. And then it's not clear if there were any targeted attacks at school. It seemed like it was probably random, but sometimes it's hard to tell if they don't leave any record. So the issue of targeted versus random, you can see either type in any of the three categories. Okay. I'm going to have to kind of buzz along because there's a lot to cover still. So I need to emphasize that most people who are psychopathic, psychotic, or traumatized never kill anybody. So one, we don't need to freak out and panic if we see any signs of any of these three things, if there's no signs of intended violence. And the typology is important to help us understand the range of perpetrators. It's also important in terms of intervention because how you intervene with people is going to vary depending on where they fall in the typology. But it also means there's other factors beyond the typology that we need to consider. So don't have time to go into this. I'm just going to acknowledge it and move on. I've written about apparent genetic influences, developmental, meaning prenatal, postnatal influences. Some perpetrators had either they went through difficult pregnancies or problematic births, maybe lack of oxygen. A number of them were developmentally delayed. Not most, but in some we do see that. And body-related issues in terms of not feeling good about themselves as males, birth defects, just feeling unusually unattractive, obese, too short, too unathletic, and so on. There may be a lot of biological factors. If you want to read more about that, I can give you a resource. Socially, a lot of things go wrong in the lives of the perpetrators leading up to their attacks. So it's not that everything's wonderful. There could be all kinds of frustrations, failures, setbacks, stresses going on in their lives in the weeks, months, even years leading up to the attack. So the typology is a starting point, but we need to look more broadly for a full understanding of this phenomenon. I'm going to spend a little time on this one because we see this a lot. So many shooters or attackers find role models, people they want to imitate, people who inspire them. Senior year at Columbine, Eric Harris did his research paper on Hitler and the Nazis, and Dylan Klebold did his on Charles Manson. Those were not random choices. Those were their role models. In today's world, people most likely to be cited as inspirations are Harris and Klebold. They have become the next generation's role model for violence. And you see ideologies of hatred, supremacy, and violence. Often, people get drawn to the Nazis, sometimes Satanism or the magic in the occult, or white supremacy. We see these ideologies show up often. And we see a lot of fame-seeking behavior. As I said with Eric Harris, he wanted to go down in history. A lot of shooters see violence as their way to making their mark in the world. So if you're looking over student writings, well, first I should say any reference to Columbine is not necessarily a warning sign. I get contacted routinely by students, often high school or college, who are doing class projects or doing projects on school safety because this is a big issue in their lives. So just because someone mentions Harris or Klebold or Columbine doesn't mean they're an aspiring school shooter. They may be aspiring to be someone in this room someday. But if the language used is idolizing killers or deifying killers, and you're seeing that in student assignments or on their social media, those are concerns. The Virginia Tech perpetrator called the Columbine killers martyrs. Sebastian Bossi was a shooter in Germany. Eric Harris is God. This was a Pennsylvania kid, Alex Schreibel, who committed a mass stabbing at his school. I became a prophet because I spread the word of a God. Who's the God? Eric Harris. Chris Harper Mercer, we'll hear again from him in a bit. He wrote about people who are elite, people who stand with the gods, people like Elliot Rodger, Vester Flanagan, the Columbine kids, Adam Lanza, and Sung Cho. He's citing murderers as people who stand with the gods. So if you come across this kind of language, that's a concern. A factual reference or discussion of school shootings may or may not be anything of concern. This kind of language is concerning. Eric Harris wrote, I love the Nazis. I love their beliefs and who they were, what they did, and what they wanted. And this is especially bizarre if you keep in mind, Eric grew up on US military bases. His grandfather served in World War II. If Eric had any aspiration in life, it was to become a Marine. And here he is, loving the Nazis. You may not know this name. This was an Oregon shooter. Here I am, 26, with no friends, no job, no girlfriend, a virgin. I long ago realized that society likes to deny people like me these things. Though we may have been born bad, society left us no recourse, no way to be good. I have been forced to align myself with demonic forces. My success in hell is assured. They will give me the power that I seek. So this is a dynamic we often see. People who feel like they're utter failures, they have nothing going for them, they're losers. But if they attach themselves to the Nazis had power. Attach yourself to Satan. Satan is a powerful figure. They use these ideologies to compensate for the inadequacy they feel in themselves. So it has this kind of transformational appeal. You can become somebody if you become a Nazi. Because if you believe in their ideology and you're white, Aryans are superior. So even if I feel like I'm an utter failure, if I decide, well, I'm Aryan, that makes me superior, it's a way of trying to boost an inadequate sense of self. Now, a couple of slides ago, Harper Mercer mentioned Vester Flanagan as someone who stands with the gods. You may not remember this, but in 2015, in Virginia, there was a woman television broadcaster on scene somewhere doing an interview. Vester Flanagan walked up to her and live on air gunned her down and shot her cameraman. And he filmed it on his cell phone. And as he flees, he uploads that footage to social media. So that was in Virginia. Harper Mercer's up in Oregon. But he was intrigued by this, and he wrote a blog about it. And part of the blog says this: so many people like him are all alone and unknown, yet when they spill a little blood, the whole world knows who they are. A man who was known by no one is now known by everyone. His face splashed across every screen, his name across the lips of every person on the planet, all in the course of one day. Seems the more people you kill, the more you're in the limelight. Now, that last sentence could just be seen as a piece of social commentary that is true. The more people you kill, the more attention you get, right? And he wrote that on August 31st. What do you think he did on October 1st, just a month later? He went to his community college and gunned people down. This is a remarkable articulation of this dynamic of trying to go from being nobody to being somebody through mass violence. He lays it out. That's the appeal of it. How do you go from being a nobody to somebody on the lips of every person on the planet all in one day? You kill a lot of people. So for a lot of these shooters, I see violence as their attempt to make their mark, go down in history, give themselves a sense of identity that is otherwise lacking. He's the one who said, here I am, 26, no girlfriend, no job, no friend, a virgin. He had nothing going in his life, but he was going to make his mark. As I said already, Eric Harris, I want to leave a lasting impression on the world. Parkland shooter said, I am nothing. I am no one. My life is nothing and meaningless. I live a lone life, live in seclusion and solitude. I hate everyone and everything. With the power of my AR-15, you will all know who I am. So again, someone who's nothing, has nothing going for him in his life, he will make us all pay attention to him. So as I said at the beginning, there's no one cause of school shootings. This is a very rapid overview: biological, psychological, social, and larger cultural forces. So I recently had a book chapter published called Biopsychosocial Cultural: 4 Domains of Factors Contributing to School Shootings. I posted about it on LinkedIn. I'm not allowed to post the chapter on LinkedIn, but if you contact me directly, I'm allowed to email you a PDF of the chapter if you want a more detailed overview of all that. So that's a lot of talk about the perpetrators. I want to talk a bit now about prevention. I already mentioned the gift of fear. Pay attention if you or anyone you work with is living in fear of somebody. Peter Odegazuwa was a 43-year-old law student who committed a school shooting at law school. Afterwards, someone said, we used to sit around and talk about how Peter's going to shoot somebody. They were not surprised. People were afraid of this guy, but they didn't do anything about it. Wayne Lowe was an 18-year-old freshman in college who committed an attack. Afterwards, someone said, it's not like we haven't been afraid of Wayne. My friends and I had been talking daily about how scary he is. They're talking daily about it. No one did anything about it. So again, people may live in fear and just kind of shrug their shoulders and do nothing. Fear is a key indicator that something needs to be investigated. Nicholas Cruz was a problematic student more or less his entire life. He had some good periods for maybe a few months at a time. This is the Parkland perpetrator. Incredible history of disciplinary actions, detentions, suspensions. People were living in fear of him. At one point, he wasn't allowed to have a backpack in school. He threatened to rape and kill his ex-girlfriend and to kill her family. I mean, this was someone who people were afraid of. And nothing really significant was done about it. In fact, during the attack, Cruz shot 34 people, and everyone's fleeing the building. So he drops his gun, and he's walking out among the crowd, just blending in. And he was no longer a student at the school. He was 19 at the time, but he had been a student at the school. And a kid walking next to him looked at him and said, "You know, I would have thought if anyone was going to do this, you'd be the one." And he just kind of smiled and kept his mouth shut. The fact that he was the one who did it was not a surprise to people. So on the one hand, pay attention to fear. That could be critical indication that someone poses a danger. However, having said that, we have to kind of flip that over and talk about the kids no one ever suspected, because that happens too. So, we may all have a stereotype of what school shooters are like, who they are. Teenage white males, the misfits, the outcasts, the loners who get picked on so badly they come to school with a gun and murder their tormentors. That just about never happens. It's hard to name a shooter who fits all those parameters. If we think school shootings are retaliation for bullying, we're missing the point, because that almost never is the case. So we have to get beyond thinking we know what a school shooter looks like. So there was a situation at a high school somewhere in this country, and the administrators became aware that there was a plot involving multiple kids, 3, 4, 5, I don't know how many students. They were planning a massacre at the school, and you might think that would generate some concern. However, the administrators looked at the kids, kind of scratched their heads and said, "Nah, I don't think so." One administrator said, "They look like normal kids. I mean, literally, just look like normal kids. They were on the wrestling team." Looking at them, I will say this, when I heard it was the one kid I had met before, I was like, no way, what, are you kidding? No way. So the fact that someone's on the wrestling team means they can't be a danger? Because we want to think that school shooters are completely disaffected, disconnected at school, no school involvement. No, they can be athletes. They can be in the theater department. They could be anybody. But they look like normal kids. Well, that really concerns me. What does that mean, they look like normal kids? What does he think a school shooter looks like? Another administrator said they weren't isolated. They did not fit what we thought was the profile for the kind of student that would plan something like this. Again, the guy had a profile in mind, and these kids didn't fit that profile. They were engaged in school. They were involved in the sport. Again, seeming to think that a school shooter has to be someone completely detached from the school community. They seem to have a large base of friends. They even had popularity amongst the student body. Again, thinking that anyone who has friends is not going to be a school shooter. All these misconceptions. So you've got administrators hearing about an alleged conspiracy to commit a massacre at their school, and they're basically saying, "No, I don't think so." Fortunately, in this case, the amount of evidence of the impending attack was so overwhelming, they were forced to take it seriously and investigate. But what if those kids had done a better job of keeping their mouths shut? We would have been reading about this school in the news. And that's the danger of thinking you know what a school shooter looks like. If they play sports, they can't be shooters. If they have friends, they can't be shooters. Wrong, wrong, wrong. So they look like normal kids. Here's 10 middle school and high school kids. Which one's the school shooter? They're all school shooters. All these kids as young as 11, 12, and 13 years old committed school shootings. So if you have someone brought to your attention, has a potential danger, and you look at the kid and he's got a nice smile and has friends and maybe he's on a sports team, you might be tempted to say, "No, we don't need to look into this, he's fine." They look like normal kids. They always look like normal kids. And as I said, sometimes it is the kid like Nicholas Cruz whom no one is surprised by. But often it's not. Mitchell Johnson, by the way, Mitchell Johnson is on the top row, second in from the right. Rosy-cheeked 13-year-old boy. He teamed up with bottom row, second from the left, 11-year-old Andrew Golden. An 11-year-old and a 13-year-old committed an attack, shooting 15 people, killing 5. So regarding Mitchell Johnson, some of the teachers said Mitchell Johnson was one of the nicest, quietest kids they had. Teacher said, I still cannot believe that Mitchell Johnson did that because he was the most polite student I've ever had. So yeah, it could be Nicholas Cruz is always in trouble and cursing and stirring up conflict with his peers. It could be the most polite student you've ever had. But if there's warning signs, you follow the evidence where it leads. That's one of my other mottos. Follow the evidence where it leads. Even if it's normal-looking kids, most polite student you've ever had. Drew Golden, the 11-year-old, teacher said, if you tell me to make a list of all the boys who would do this, by no means would Andrew have been the top of the list. It's been terrifying to think that you've got this child who did this awful thing where we could tell you 20 more that we wouldn't be at all surprised to do such a thing. And it's terrifying because if everyone went back to their schools, made a list of the 20 kids they're most concerned about becoming violent, the kid who goes on the rampage may not even be on your list. And that's a very frightening thought. So it all comes down to follow the evidence where it leads. And that goes for peers making the same mistake. Michael Carneal was 14, hadn't had his growth spurt yet, so he was only about 5'2". Girl said this afterwards. Michael told us he was going to do something that day, but he was one of those people that was just kind of little. You just want to give him a hug because he's so funny and nice. Didn't seem like somebody that could possibly do something like that. So the message has to be, for everyone, school staff, families, students, report the warning signs. Because in so many of these cases, kids knew what was going to happen. They just didn't believe it was going to happen. They heard about it. The perpetrators told them. But, you know, he's a friend of mine, seems like a nice kid. All kinds of reasons get in the way. So we have to educate our students to pass along what they hear. It's as simple as see something, say something. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip ahead. Charles Whitman was described as seeming like the all-American boy, and Stephen Kazmerchik, who massacred people at Northern Illinois University, was described as a professor as the golden child of the department. So you've got the all-American boy and the golden child becoming mass murderers. So again, follow the evidence where it leads. So when I talk about reporting what you hear, see something, say something, I want to very quickly go through warning signs. We have a whole book called Warning Signs, so you can read a lot more about it. But things people say include leakage and threats. Leakage means when they leak their intentions. And things people do consist of attack-related behavior. So there's all kinds of leakage. You know, Brenda Spencer, 2 days before her attack, told her best friend, hey, Monday's going to be the day. It's going to be big. I may even be on television. She was just bragging about it. This is a big event, and there's a lot of excitement. Other times, people do try to warn people. They don't want to kill everybody, so they may tell their friends, don't show up at school. They may try to get someone to join them in the attack. All these things are examples of leakage. And if our students are taught to report all this, we can prevent the attacks. And leakage can be very explicit, or threats can be very explicit. When I come back with a rifle, you're going to be the one I shoot. You cannot get clearer than that. That kid who heard that, who that was said to, did not report it. Fortunately, he did survive the attack. So again, examples of very explicit warning signs. But sometimes it's not so explicit. Better watch your back if you're going to flunk me. Is that a homicidal threat? Could be. Might not be. Might just, give you flat tires or vandalize your car or something, but you don't know. Have the power to bring the whole school down to its knees. What does that mean? Nobody asked any questions, and nobody found out. They found out 2 weeks later when Wayne Lowe gunned people down on campus. So leakage and threats can be either explicit or more subtle. The problem when they're explicit is no one takes them seriously. The problem when they're not explicit is people don't read between the lines, or they don't ask follow-up questions to find out, what does that mean to bring the whole school down to its knees? You know. Someone says, I'm plotting an evil day, or I'm going to do something stupid that's going to get me jailed or killed. Those are warning signs. They're not as explicit as some, but kids need to be taught to report these things. An attack-related behavior is anything that shows someone's planning an attack. They're not just talking about it, they're not just thinking about it, they are taking steps to make it happen. So there's all kinds of attack-related behavior. And along with that, there's a process. Someone came up with a 5-stage model. Begins with the fantasy, the idea. Hey, wouldn't it be cool, man? I wish I could do this. And then they start thinking, oh, maybe I could. How would I go about it? They start planning it. Preparation is gathering the materials, the attack-related behavior, and then going to the venue of attack and carrying out the attack. We have 3 stages in which we could identify this danger: fantasy, planning, and preparation. Warning signs are reported. You do your threat assessment investigation. You intervene as necessary. If we miss those steps, then we have to rely on whatever physical security measures we have in our emergency response, like lockdown drills, you know. Now, not all warning signs are equally concerning. So what if someone in stage 1 were to say, sometimes I feel like just getting a gun from somewhere and going on a rampage? Should we be concerned about this person? I'm going to say yes. Is there an imminent danger? He doesn't have a gun. It's a feeling he gets. Maybe the feeling will pass. But what if someone in stage 3 says, I stole my dad's shotgun, and Friday at noon I'm getting revenge in the cafeteria? That is an imminent danger. The more specifics, the more concern. So time, place, method, and access to the means, those are critical pieces of information. And also, is it a realistic, achievable plan, or is it just a fantasy of violence? So to drive home that difference, here's someone's grand fantasies of violence. Be like the LA riots, the Oklahoma bombing, World War II, Vietnam, all mixed together. Hijack a hell of a lot of bombs, crash a plane into New York. I have a goal to destroy as much as possible. I want to burn the world. I say kill mankind. No one should survive. Is this teenage boy going to make these things happen? Of course not. These are impossible. There's no reality to these. Might we still be concerned about this boy's level of rage and violent fantasies? Yes. Is it about to happen tomorrow? No, not based on what we have. Here's another passage by the same kid. First, we will go to the house of, and he names 2 specific people. In the morning before school, we go and we silently kill each inhabitant and then pin them down, take our sweet time pissing on them, spitting on them, and just torturing the hell out of them. When you see references to torture, that suggests sadism. Sadism suggests psychopathy, psychopathic personality. Once we're done there, we set time bombs to burn the houses down, then get totally prepared. And during a lunch, we go in and park in our spots. With sunglasses on, we start carrying all of our bags of terrorism and anarchism shit into our table. Being very casual and silent about it. It's all for a science, band, English project or something. Then we sit down, play some pump-up music, light a $50 stogie, and get ready to start throwing out the first wave of crickets. Then we light them and throw them as far as we can. Then I open fire. Then if we can, we go upstairs and go to each classroom and pick off fuckers at our will. This, to me, is a whole lot scarier than I say, kill mankind, no one should survive. This is a methodical plan. This is realistic. Could this be carried out by a couple of kids? Yeah, they've put a lot of thought into this. There's no specific date mentioned, so we don't know how imminent it is. But the fact that this is realistic planning, methodical planning, Every step of the way, they've given thought to what they're going to do. This, to me, is far more concerning than impossible fantasies of violence. Okay? Anyone know who all these fantasies and so on were written by? Eric Harris. This was on his website where people could see it. And some people did see it. You think we need to? Okay, we're back. Thank you. All right. So this was Eric Harris. Some people did see this. Why this did not lead to an intervention is a convoluted story. But this was all on his website. In the interest, well, I'll do this one. Michael Carneal was a 14-year-old boy. He was leaking his plans for weeks leading up to the attack. This is just a little bit of it. He's referring to Monday, the Monday after Thanksgiving break. Something big is going to happen. Okay? It's going to involve blood and guts, be the day of reckoning. Wouldn't it be cool to walk down the hall and kill people? At least 5 kids had seen Michael with a gun in school in the weeks leading up to the attack. So this is not just warning signs. If we look at this through the lens of evidence of imminence, the hypocrites in the prayer group were going to go down. At his school, before classes started each morning, a small group of kids gathered in the lobby and had a little prayer circle. So stay away from the prayer group. The hypocrites in the prayer group are going down. If we think of this in terms of evidence of imminence, do we know when this attack is going to occur? Yeah, it's going to be Monday after Thanksgiving. Where's it going to happen? It's going to be in the school lobby. What kind of attack is it going to be? It's going to be a shooting. Do we know if he has access to guns? Yes, we do. 5 kids have seen him in school with guns. Do we even know who the victims are going to be? Yes, we do. What do you think happened on Monday morning? Came into school, shot 8 times, hit 8 people, killed 3. I mean, like so many attacks, could so easily have been prevented if the kids who heard all this leakage had just stepped forward. So in the interest of time, I'm going to skip ahead. Just more examples of evidence of imminence. So why don't people take action? By the way, there's a chapter in the book, Warning Signs, called Barriers to Action. So I'm not going to spend much time on it. You have a whole chapter on it. But if you look at what people say after the attack, it's typically something along these lines. I thought it was bragging. Didn't think it was really going to hurt anybody. I thought it was talking big and bad. Nobody took him seriously, and so on. So some people focus on the so-called code of silence among students. You don't want to be a tattletale or a snitch. That sometimes might be a factor, but it seems like mainly kids just don't believe it. If you keep in mind, sometimes the perpetrators are 11, 12, 13 years old. How do you take a kid like that mouthing off as a potential mass murderer? So I think there's a lot of denial around the fact that it could happen. Can't happen here, not in our school, not in our town. We've got good kids. I know these kids. Or look at who made the statement. Andrew Golden was like barely over 4 feet tall. He was 11 years old. Who's going to take that seriously? Mitchell Johnson was 13. Michael Carneal was 14. You might just think the kid's too young. He's too small to do this. We have to get past that thinking. As I keep saying, follow the evidence where it leads. Sometimes people might not want to report out of fear. They don't want to get involved. They don't want to get the kid in trouble. They don't want to get the kid mad at them. Imagine if the kid has a hit list. You don't want to end up on that hit list. So maybe you don't want to tattle on him, you know? So we have to teach kids the importance of reporting. You snitch on someone to get them in trouble. You report a safety concern to save lives. That's very different. So that message has to get out to the students. People might think that if you're going to commit a major crime like this, you're not going to announce it, but we know that they do announce it. We might hear, well, he's been saying that for months. He hasn't done it. He's all talk and no action. No, repeated leakage is a reason for increased concern, not decreased concern. And schools may not want to kind of stigmatize the kid by doing a threat assessment because word gets around and the parents get upset and, it creates commotion in the school community and so on. So there may be all kinds of reasons people don't want to report anything. And for those who work in schools, they're concerned about FERPA, Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. Federal law, like HIPAA protects health information, FERPA protects students' school information. FERPA does not prohibit you from discussing and investigating potential danger. And the Department of Education put out a pamphlet to make that clear, balancing student privacy and school safety. The pamphlets on my website, there's one for higher ed and one for K-12 schools. So there's all kinds of barriers to action. As I said, there's so many lessons learned, so many things went wrong in the Kinkle case. What I did not tell you earlier was that both parents were school teachers in that district. Kip's father taught at the high school for 30 years. He had recently retired. Mom taught elsewhere. So Bill and Faith Kinkle were well-known, well-respected educators in the community. That was a problem. Of course, one of the administrators had asked Bill Kinkle, Bill, there aren't any guns at home, are there? And Bill said, oh, no guns. Bill knew quite well there were guns because he had bought some of them. Dad was trying to protect the family reputation in the community, so he was trying to minimize, he was doing damage control. So Dad lied to the administrator about the guns at home. And even though Kip was found to have a loaded gun in his locker at school, nobody asked him why. Nobody asked any of his friends if they had heard him talk about committing a shooting, which he had. Nobody talked to any of his school teachers. He'd handed in an essay which he talked about getting an AR-15 and killing everybody. Nobody talked to the teachers. Nobody talked to the students. No investigation was done. Why? After the incident, this was said. We'd crafted preventive measures. We'd created a safety wall, but the rules we set up were ignored when the moment of truth arrived. They were not followed because, quite simply, he was Kinkle. Instead of considering the fact of the gun, they considered the family of the boy who was caught with it. We know Bill and Faith. Yeah, we have to suspend them and probably expel them because that's the policy, but we're not going to ask any questions. And that cost Bill and Faith their lives, as well as 2 kids at the school. And it could be sticky because the student in question could be the child of the superintendent or the police chief or mayor or any prominent person in the community. But as I keep saying, follow the evidence where it leads. If you don't, you're putting lives in danger. So if you're doing threat assessment, want to look at threats, leakage, and attack-related behavior. And as I talked about, there's often a lot of social failure, stresses, and so on, leading up to the attack. And going back to that Dave Grossman quote, most people are not capable of killing. But if you're psychopathic, psychotic, or traumatized, and everything's going wrong in your life, you can become desperate enough, enraged enough. You get to the point where you think other people just deserve to die. And look for evidence of imminence. I talked about Eric Harrison being con artists if you're psychopathic and so on. Just want to drive that point home. Kid says, I've been working on this craft of mine for as long as I can remember now. The biggest con I've ever done, making things seem like they're all right when in reality they're not. And people believe me. They think I'm doing well and better when really my hatred and anger is maintained pretty constant. I'm just good at lying and making things seem okay. I'm very proud of myself, for nobody I know could pull this off as well as I am. It's amazing, they have no idea what's going on. This is my biggest and grandest work of art that's been years in the making, but yet they've been clueless. So keep in mind, you could interview someone who does a very good presentation of being completely innocent, and this is what's going on behind the scenes. And that's why when you do threat assessment, you don't just talk to the person in question. You talk to their teachers and their classmates, and maybe you look at their the assignments they've handed in, and you look on their social media, and you talk to their parents, and you do a comprehensive investigation because some people are just very skilled at deceiving us. Now, this kid was very good at being deceptive, but he was not good at keeping his mouth shut. Told a friend what he was up to, and she reported him, and he was arrested. The attack never happened. So again, it can be that simple if there's just one person who makes that phone call or reaches out to somebody. I'm going to end with a final we're all on duty example. There was a high school girls soccer game going on, and there's a woman just sitting in the bleachers watching the game. She didn't know she was on duty, but she was. A couple rows below her in the bleachers, there's two boys talking. And she hears like Columbine, and it's going to be bigger than Columbine, and she starts tuning into what they're saying. And they're planning a massacre at the school. So she gets out her cell phone and just kind of very quietly snaps photos of these two boys and sends them to the school resource officer at school. The next day, the officer finds the two boys, pulls them out of class, asks a few questions. They confess the whole thing. That attack never happened because a woman sitting in the bleachers heard something that concerned her, and she took action. So when I say we're all on duty, that's what I mean. Any place we go throughout our day, we might see or hear something. There was an attack that was stopped because someone was in a McDonald's parking lot and saw a notebook on the ground. Picked it up, flipped through, seeing if there was any identification in there. And it's about how two kids were going to commit an absolute massacre at their school. So she found out what school it was, passed it along, those kids were arrested, it was stopped. So when I say we're all on duty, not just in our professional lives, anywhere, we may see something on Facebook, you may find that notebook on the ground or left somewhere at a Panera, pay attention because we could all be stopping violent attacks. So I have 3 books in my website. If you want to take a look at the other 2 books, I'll be outside this room afterwards. And also, if you want to stop by and just chat or ask additional questions, please feel free. But it's 11 o'clock, so I need to stop now. So, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Langman. You've given us a lot to think about and actions that we can take. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to everyone in our Northern Tier hospitals who's here virtually today. I just want to say, please take a look at the annual report, Leonard Parker Pool Institute for Health. We have our website is lppih.org. We have a very active LinkedIn page where you can see some things that are happening, and we also have this video will be on our YouTube channel. We have other videos of former speakers also on our YouTube channel. And please scan the QR code and give us a survey before you leave the room today. And Dr. Langman will be outside with some other books available. So thank you.